Originally, people who were Christians did not call themselves Christians. First Christians were not known colloquially as Christians. They were known as people of the way. People of the way. The first Christians were known as people who lived their lives a certain way, from a certain orientation, from a certain model or perspective of reality. Now, these original people of the way, they were kind of viewed as being a little different from the common folk of the era because they had a different perspective on reality. They had a different way of engaging with the challenges of life. These original people of the way were really focused on embodying the sacred wisdom that I am, meaning my very awareness of itself, my imagination, is the source of the reality that I am experiencing. When I understand that I am the cause and the source of the reality that I am experiencing, there is a way of going about living from that perspective. When I understand that I am living in a world of imagination, and I understand that all that I behold, though it appears to be without, it is actually within my own awareness, within my own imagination, then the way to change my world, the way to change anything that I appear to be experiencing on the outside is to change myself, to change my imagination, to change my habitual thinking, my habitual ways of being, to change an aspect of myself, understanding that this world in which I am living is reflecting back to me the state that I am living in. And so these people of the way, when something would happen on the outside, their first instinct was to go within and to change the image on the inside. Here in Sunday Mystery School, we are focused on the teachings of Neville Goddard, the original Mystery School Masterclass taught by Neville Goddard. And we're on lesson 4, which is titled, No One to Change But Self. And as it turns out that really what Neville is teaching here is the way of changing oneself. Because once we understand that we are living in a world of imagination and there is nothing that is not self, then the only thing that makes sense is to learn how to change oneself, to learn how to become self-made. The process for changing oneself, process through changing one's imagination, is really the same process that the ancient mystics, the writers of the scripture, shared originally. These people of the way, they came up with the way and they talked about it and they shared it and they conveyed it through symbolism. They worded it into their stories. They wove it into parables, into these ways of relating to ideas that were clothed in characters and in form and in conversations. And then we, as the observers of these stories, we can assimilate this wisdom by really sitting with what is being communicated. What is that key thread of wisdom that is holding this story together? And really what we find when we look at the scriptures through the eyes of people who are living the way, we find that the scriptures are telling us that as human beings living in a body, a physical body that has these 5 senses, these ancient scriptures are telling us that there's really 2 worlds that we can perceive. One is the world that is perceived through the 5 senses. This is the tangible 3D world. This is the world of shape and form and flesh. And a lot of people will spend most of their lives really focused on living in the 3D, living in this world of form and flesh that can be measured by the senses. And these ancient mystics also taught us that there is another world, a world that is greater than what we can perceive with five senses, a world of imagination that contains the lower world that can be perceived by the five senses, but is actually so much bigger. It's so much larger. It is all-encompassing. It is a second world. It is a higher world. It is a higher mind. And we are told in the scriptures that learning to think from this higher mind and learning to perceive this greater world that encompasses the lower world, as we do that, we start to become associated with a higher level of thinking, a higher dimension of thinking, a dimension of thinking, a way of thinking that Neville referred to as thinking fourth dimensionally, and a way of thinking, a dimension of thinking that the ancient mystics referred to as the Christ mind. Because when we really begin to understand that there is this higher dimensional world that really is our imagination, and it contains everything that we perceive in the lower realms as components of this higher realm, and we begin to associate our identity with being the higher realm, we begin to graduate our awareness from, oh, I'm just a solitary, singular human being living a sensory experience, to, I am the incarnation of consciousness itself, and there's an aspect of me that is experiencing a human experience. And there's also a greater aspect of me that can tap into and can experience any experience in the field of all possible realities. As we start to align and attune with this higher perspective, that is giving birth to the Christ mind within our awareness. This idea of the Christ mind is really associated with this idea of oneness. There's really nothing outside of me. Really, everything is a part of me. And so naturally, as I begin to understand that there really is nothing outside of self, meaning that everything that is, can be perceived is a part of me, some aspect of me. And then we start to really understand why that is the case. Like from an existential perspective, we understand why we are having an incarnated experience of ourselves, and it is to know ourselves, to expand an awareness of ourselves. And as we start to tune into this awareness, they're walking hand in hand with this level of awareness is a very deep love and appreciation for the nature of reality itself, the nature of this paradigm, the nature of the world, the nature of us being a part of this world. And we obviously are told in the scriptures that the Christ mind is associated with love. And we see Jesus Christ, which is the animation in a character of this state of being in the scriptures. We see this being really being the embodiment of pure love, all love. And so we, as we are rising to this higher level of awareness, we begin to become the embodiment of all love, of pure love. It's a natural part of this process of awakening to a higher dimension of perspective, higher dimension of awareness, as we begin to understand that everything that we're experiencing, the reason why we're experiencing it, all comes back down to this key idea of love. Now, these ancient mystic teachers taught that when we are associated with the 3D human body, as so many of us just naturally are, that is being born of a human, born of woman. Okay, that's the first birth. Okay, so when we first, come into this local 3D human world, we're born from below, meaning we come out of our mothers and we are introduced to a human perspective. And we begin to live the world relating to it from our senses, what we can see, what we can taste, hear, touch, smell. The world as it is revealed to our senses, we begin to live that way. And as we begin to grow and to mature and eventually find a spiritual path and then begin to grow and awaken in a spiritual sense, then we become aware of this higher perspective. And that higher perspective then becomes born in our awareness. And this is what the ancient mystics referred to as the second birth, or the birth from above. And remember in the scriptures, Jesus saying, you must be born again in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, the first time that we're born, we enter the kingdom of earth, because we're born from below, we're born out of our mothers. And so the second time that we are born, we become aware that we are inheriting the kingdom of heaven, meaning we become aware that we have access to, and we can be the incarnation of a higher dimensional perspective, the fourth dimensional mind, the Christ mind. And the ancient mystic teachers taught us that we can begin to align with this perspective by taking certain acts, certain behaviors, while we're in this world that is determined by our senses or perceived by our senses. There's certain things that we can do to begin to allow for our awareness to rise more naturally, more easily to a higher state so that we can be people of the way. The ancient mystics spoke of this as, used a couple different descriptions, but it really comes down to shutting the doors of the senses. So they talk about it, going into the inner room or going into the closet and closing the doors. They spoke of going up to a high place in a building or in a city, meaning rising to a higher part of your consciousness, but kind of secluding away. And really what these ways of describing were meant to convey is this idea of dimming the senses by entering a state of meditative contemplation. Okay, so in the last episode 20 of Sunday Mystery School, Neville was sharing his technique, which is just really a resharing of what the original mystics wrote in the scriptures, this idea of closing the doors of the senses or going into the closet and shutting the door. It's quite directly stated by Neville as reclining in a comfortable chair and closing your eyes and entering a sleepy state of awareness where the world that is measured by the senses begins to dim and fade away. And you enter into this state of awareness that borders on sleep, but isn't complete sleep. It's mind is still awake, but the body rests. You can even call it mind is awake and the body sleeps. You find this little window of awareness where you are less aware of the physical 3D world. And by doing that, by kind of dimming how loud the 3D world is, meaning the world you can measure with your senses, by dimming your senses so that world kind of fades, you can open up your awareness to a dimensionally larger world. And you can begin to build a familiarity, a relationship with this higher aspect of your being by simply going through this meditative contemplation. So this first step is to practice entering into this state of meditative contemplation where the world, as measured by your senses, becomes quite dim. Simply disconnecting or kind of detaching from, how loud, turning down the volume of how loud our senses are in our awareness. And then by doing that, by turning down the volume here in the world of form and flesh, we're turning up the volume of that higher level of our awareness, which is inherent in every human being, but we have the free will of whether to welcome an experience of that higher realm or not. And one of the ways that we welcome it is by going through this process of dimming the senses and then turning up and attuning our awareness to a higher reality, a dimensionally larger experience of reality. And Neville teaches us that this dimensionally larger experience of reality, when we go through the gate and we're kind of leaving the world of the senses behind and we enter into something larger, something bigger, that is the world of pure imagination. That is the world that is the source code that spawns the world of the 3D. And so we start to, as we really experience this wisdom for ourselves, we start to realize that whatever we do experience with the senses here has its cause, has its root, has its origin in a dimensionally larger realm, has its origin in the world of imagination. And so we start to understand that if we are able, if if we choose, because we are all able, if we choose to move into this dimensionally larger realm that is the world of pure imagination, and in that dimensionally larger realm that is also the source code of the offspring of that dimensionally larger world, which we could call the world of the senses. So it's like it's the source code, it's the parent. It gives birth to the world of the senses. So if we can rise our level of awareness up into that world that is the source code of this world here, we can modify that source code by modifying our awareness, by changing our imagination, by changing self. And this is, of course, the way. This is the way. The people of the way do this. The people of the way live this way. The people of the way live in the 3D, understanding that it is an offspring of the higher dimensions. And the people of the way make a habit of accessing the higher dimensions, moving their conscious awareness into higher planes of awareness to make conscious alterations or modifications to that code that spawns and is clothed in form and flesh in our world. Because of the nature of this wisdom, there are so many metaphors and analogies that we can use to describe what is happening here. This is literally the most fundamental experience that any human being has. There's a world of flesh and form, and then there's a higher world of imagination. And really the difference between people of the way and people who haven't found the way yet is really that ability to find the distinction between the world of the 3D form and the higher world of awareness. So some of the ways that we really illuminate this distinction is, here in Sunday Mystery School, we speak a lot about authorship, about understanding that on a higher dimensional plane, we are authors and we are really writing the story of our lives. And on a lower dimensional plane, we are the main character of that story. And we are experiencing as though we are on a stage, as the great mystic Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage and all the people are players thereon. Okay, so in this lower dimensional world of form and flesh, we're operating on a stage and, the people are coming and acting out what we have written in that higher dimensional plane. We have written, Neville says a lot, he says, people come and tell you in the 3D who you imagine that you are in the higher dimensional realm. Meaning that if I'm accessing my imagination and I am dimming the evidence of the senses and I'm going into that state of being the author, and then I am writing an identity for myself, and I'm telling myself that I am the person that I desire to be, that my dreams are fulfilled, that my desires are satiated, that I am living the life that I desire to live. And if I can tune in and experience that life in that higher plane, higher realm of awareness, that becomes a script. And when I return to this world of form and flesh, the people who are the other characters, who are the other actors, who show up and clothed in form and flesh, will repeat back to me, will reflect back to me, will show me, will tell me who I believe I am, will reflect back to me and speak from that script that I have written in a higher plane of awareness. So it is really our recognition that this is the way the world works. This is the mystery. This is why we call this mystery school. It is not, a skill that is taught in a university. This is a meta skill. This is one of those things that as you become aware of it, every aspect of your life improves, because there is no part of your life that does not have its root and source in imagination. There's no relationship in your life that is not simply reflecting back to you a belief about yourself on some level of your being. There is no circumstance or situation or person, place or thing or event that is outside of the realm of who you are. Everything that we are experiencing is a reflection of our state of being. And when we understand this, we become people of the way, because we understand that to go and try to change the mirror without changing the source of the reflection that we're seeing in the mirror, meaning ourselves, is futile. It's a great way to grind and waste energy, but it doesn't actually meaningfully change anything. Because in truth, there is only one thing to change, and that is self. There is no one to change but self. So in the text from lesson 4, no one to change but self, Neville is describing these techniques. And I find that as a student of Neville, the more I go into his work, the more I go into his lectures, his books, really his whole life was a whole body of work that explores these ideas. The more I see how much he emphasizes practicing this level of awareness, meaning practicing lifting our level of awareness from what he calls so eloquently the dark environment of the senses. Senses are a dark environment. World of imagination is a very bright and light environment. And so when we're down in the senses, it's a very dark place. We can only, what we can perceive is limited. We can only perceive so much. When we move into that world of imagination, everything, it's like flipping on the light switch, and suddenly we can see everything. And Neville emphasizes over and over again throughout his entire body of work, practicing entering this state, practicing entering the state where we can change ourselves. Our imaginal acts on that higher plane, meaning, is the way Neville describes it, when we move into that higher dimensional state of awareness through a state akin to sleep or being very relaxed, meditative contemplation, what we do when we go there, that is what is modifying ourselves. Okay, so the way that Neville teaches this, the way that other mystics teach this, the way that we teach this here in Sunday Mystery School, is we go into this plane of awareness and we choose a scene, some sort of drama, some sort of play, something that we can imagine that is happening to us in that world of imagination that implies that whatever we desire to change has indeed changed. Okay, so this is how to operate this model of reality. If we're living in a consciousness model of reality, then we must move our consciousness into the feeling of the wish fulfilled, knowing that the mirror will then reflect back to us those modified conditions. Okay, so how do we move our consciousness there? We craft and create a scene that would imply the fulfillment of our desire, and then we place our consciousness there, place ourselves in the scene. We begin to act out the scene. Because a lot of us are still learning to focus and sustain our attention, it is important, while we're learning how to sustain our attention for longer lengths of time, it is important at first to make it a very concise scene, just something simple. Neville suggests, shaking someone's hand or feeling a congratulatory hug, or, someone saying, someone that loved one telling us, hey, congratulations on your breakthrough, congratulations on whatever it is that we are now embodying, that we're celebrating, that we're now embodying. A very concise scene that implies the fulfillment and evokes the emotional state associated with the fulfillment. Why does this work? Because consciousness is the only reality. Everything that we're experiencing is consciousness. And so when we're in this meditative state and we move our consciousness into a scene that would imply the fulfillment of our desire, we have now literally moved our consciousness. We have literally moved that source code. We have literally rewritten it in some way, revised, rewritten, reshaped, remolded in some way. And so now, when we have gone and done that, and we feel, that which I have done, we can feel the change. We can feel the difference because now we've experienced something that prior we had not experienced. We come back out of that meditative, contemplative state a different person because we have now had an experience that we have not had prior. And so that's what has changed. We've now had a new experience. And so we come back changed because our experiences change us. Coming back into this world of form and flesh as a changed experience, we now move easefully and gracefully across what Neville describes as a bridge of incidents, meaning that whatever is necessary in the narrative of our life, the story that just is kind of ongoing, the never-ending story that kind of makes everything sort of make sense. I grew up here and I studied this and then I became this as an occupation and then I learned these other things and then I moved on to another career and then I met this person and then I got married and then had kids, right? It's like this long story that, like, if you look back on it, all kind of ties together and makes sense. Well, that's the narrator. And that narrator is an automatic function of consciousness. It's just how this game is played. So when we're going into imagination, we're changing the narrative, changing the story by moving to a desired end and experiencing that. Now that narrator, the automatic part, Bible calls it the Father in us, does the work and automatically rewrites all of the parts of all of the characters in our world to make certain that that event comes to pass. It's being the author and the character. We actually live as both. And when we are living as both, we are people of the way, because this is the way of living an illumined life. This is the way of living an enlightened life, living in the world of light, understanding the relationship between the dim world of the senses and that relationship of the world of light. We're going to continue with the text from the lesson, and this is going to wrap up lesson 4, No One to Change But Self. Neville calls, not just Neville, actually all mystics, going back to the very original mystics, the people of the way. This practice of dimming the evidence of the senses and moving into the fourth dimension, or the Christ mind, and then experiencing what we would experience were our wish fulfilled, were our desire satiated. That act is referred to in the Bible as prayer. That is the original meaning of the word prayer. Now, in the centuries since these original mystics shared their writings with the world, human beings have misinterpreted what prayer is, and in some cases have thought that it was asking something external to oneself, to give oneself a gift. Okay? Praying to an external God as an example. And that's a very 3D, dark world of the senses way to view this idea of prayer. But we can also set the record straight and recognize that in the Bible, it is said that when you pray, believe that you have received and you will. How would we do that? How would we believe that we have received when we pray? Well, we would sit back in a meditative contemplation. We would dim the evidence of our senses, meaning we would allow this 3D world of form and flesh to fade away. And then we would move in our imagination into a higher dimensional awareness. And in our imagination, we would create a scene where we would believe that we had received. And we would act out just a short, concise drama. We would shake someone's hand. We would hear someone say congratulations. We would simply feel perhaps the most simple and beautiful prayer, which is simply a thank you, Father, meaning thank you to the part of my being that changed and gave me this. We would move into that world and we would experience it. And that's how we would believe that we had received, because we would experience that we had received. And that's how we would know that the prayer was fulfilled. And that's how we would fulfill this command of Scripture. When you pray, believe that you have received and you will receive. That's one sentence. And that one sentence conveys this very deep, esoteric, mystic wisdom. And yet it is also the simplest thing to operate this law. It's easy to overcomplicate it, but in truth, it is the simplest thing. And so Neville is describing this process of encountering an event fourth dimensionally, meaning encountering in your imagination, before you encounter it three-dimensionally. That's believing that you have received. Encounter it fourth dimensionally, and then you will receive it three-dimensionally. Okay? So what Neville is saying is he says, all you need to do is imagine that you are doing it. All you need to do is imagine in that world of imagination, that higher dimensional plane, imagine that you are doing it. What Neville says is you are stretched out in time, because remember, the fourth dimension is time. You're stretched out in time, and what you are doing, which seems to be a controlled daydream, is actually an act. It's an act. You are performing an imaginal act in the greater dimension of your being. You are actually encountering an event fourth dimensionally before you encounter it here in the three dimensions of space. You encounter it fourth dimensionally before. You're time traveling in a manner of speaking. Really what you're doing is you're rising above the concept of time and you're experiencing something outside of time and then allowing that to then incarnate through time to be met in time. Neville says there's another way of praying, and that is simply to feel thankful. If I want something, either for myself or for another, I enter into this state, dim the evidence of the senses, meditative contemplation. And then in that state, I just feel happy. I feel thankful. I feel fulfilled and a gratitude for that fulfillment, because that gratitude implies that I have realized what it is that I want, either for myself or for another, or for the world. I assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and I'm grateful for it. They say gratitude is the state of receiving because it's very natural when you receive something to feel grateful for it. So you just enter into the state of gratitude, and that's the same as the state of receiving. You assume that feeling of the wish fulfilled, that state of gratitude, that state of receiving, and you allow your mind to become dominated with this single sensation, dominated by the single sensation. And in that state, you sleep. You fall asleep in that state. Neville says when you do this, you don't need to do anything in the 3D because it is already done in the 4D. Your feeling of the wish fulfilled is how you know that it is already done in the 4D. And you simply allow time to bring it to you. Neville says all of these techniques you can use and you can adjust them. You can change them to fit your temperament. But I must emphasize the necessity of inducing the drowsy state where you can become attentive without effort. A single sensation dominates the mind, crowds out all other ideas. It dominates the mind. It's the one thing that you're so incredibly intently focused on. That's how you know you have prayed successfully. The act of prayer, that's what that is. The act of prayer is allowing that one single sensation of the feeling of the wish fulfilled to rise in prominence in your awareness until it crowds out all other ideas. This is what prayer is. And it is a sacred act. It is an act of communing with your greater self. What would I feel like right now were I what I want to be? When I know what the feeling would be like, then I close my eyes and I lose myself in that single sensation. And my dimensionally greater self then builds a bridge of incident to lead me from this present moment to the fulfillment of my mood. That is all we have to do. But people, Neville says, have a habit of slighting the importance of simple things. meaning that habitually humans, if something is simple, we tend to say, oh, it must not be that important. Well, when talking about being the operant power, when talking about being the source of the reality field in which we are living, this is the simplest thing, and also by far the most important. Neville says we are creatures of habit, and we are slowly learning to relinquish our previous concepts. But the things we formerly lived by still, in some way, influence our behavior. Here is a story from the Bible that illustrates my point. It is recorded that Jesus told the disciples to go to the crossroads, and there they would find a colt, a young colt, not yet ridden by a man. He told them to bring the colt to him, and if anyone asks them, "Why do you take this colt?" tell them, "The Lord has need of it." They went to the crossroads, and they found the colt, and did exactly as they were told. They brought the unbridled ass to Jesus, and he rode it triumphantly into Jerusalem. The story has nothing to do with a man riding on a little colt. You are Jesus of the story. The colt is the mood you are going to assume. That is the living animal not yet ridden by you. You're catching a new mood, and you are riding that mood into Jerusalem, which is the right state of consciousness. It's the right way of thinking. What would the feeling be like were you to realize your desire? That is a new feeling, like a young colt. And it is a very difficult thing to ride unless you ride him or ride that feeling with a disciplined mind. If you do not remain faithful to the mood, the young colt will throw you off. That's why the Bible personifies or exemplifies this idea as being an unbridled donkey. Okay? Not easy to ride. It'll toss you off if you're not in a state of disciplined mind. Okay? But when you're able to ride it in a state of disciplined mind, you're riding it triumphantly because you have overcome the waves of emotion that can toss you off. And you are riding in a calm and serene state of mind, that feeling of the wish fulfilled. Neville says every time you become conscious that you have not or are not being faithful to this mood, you have been thrown from the colt. Discipline your mind that you may remain faithful to a high mood and ride it triumphantly into Jerusalem, which means fulfillment, the city of peace. This story precedes the feast of the Passover. If we would pass from our present state into the state of our ideal, we must assume that we are already that which we desire to be. And we must remain faithful to that assumption. We must keep a high mood if we would walk with the highest. A fixed attitude of mind, a feeling that it is done, will make it so. If I walk as though it were so, but every once in a while I look to see if it really is so, that's me falling off of my mood or falling off of that unbridled donkey, that colt. But if I would suspend judgment, like Peter, I could walk on water. Peter starts to walk on the water, then he begins to look into his own understanding, and he begins to go down. The voice said, "Look up, Peter," to the high mood. "Look up, Peter." Peter looks up, and he rises again and continues walking on the water. Instead of looking down to see if this thing is really going to harden into fact, you simply know that it is already so, and you sustain that mood. and you ride the unbridled colt into the city of Jerusalem. All of us must learn to ride the animal, to ride the mood, straight into the city of fulfillment, Jerusalem, unassisted by a man. You do not need anyone else to help you. The strange thing is that as we keep the high mood and we do not fall, others will cushion the blows. They spread the palm leaves before me, which cushion my journey. I do not have to be concerned. The shocks will be softened as I move into the fulfillment of my desire. My high mood awakens in others the ideas and actions which tend towards the embodiment of my mood. When we walk faithful to a high mood, there is no opposition and there is no competition. The test of a teacher, the test of a teaching, is to be found in the faithfulness of the taught. Neville says, I am leaving here on Sunday night. Do remain faithful to this instruction. If you continue to look for causes that are outside of your own consciousness, then I have not convinced you of the reality of consciousness. If you look for excuses for failure, you will always find them. For you always find what you seek. If you seek an excuse for failure, you will find it in the stars, in astrology, in the divination of the teacup, the tea leaves, or you'll really find it any place. The excuse will not be there, but you will find it to justify your failure. Successful business and professional men and women know that this law works. You will not find it in gossip groups, but you will find it in courageous hearts. Man's eternal journey is for one purpose: to reveal the Father. He comes to make visible his Father, and his Father is made visible in all the lovely things of the world. All the things that are lovely, all of the things that are of good report. Ride these things. Don't have any time for the unlovely in this world. Regardless of what it is, have no time for it. Focus solely on that which is lovely. And that is how we, as people of the way, make our Father visible in our world. Remain faithful to the knowledge that your consciousness, your I amness, your awareness of being aware is the only reality. It is the rock upon which all phenomena can be explained. There is no explanation outside of this. I don't know of any clear conception of the origin of phenomena, except that consciousness is all, and all is consciousness. Whatever you seek, it is already housed within you. Were it not now within you, eternity could not evolve it. There is no stretch of time long enough to evolve what is not already a potential that is within you. You simply allow this potential to manifest. You allow it to come into being by assuming that you already have it, assuming that it is already visible in your world, and remaining faithful to this assumption. When you do this, this assumption will harden into fact. Your Father has unnumbered ways of revealing your assumption. Fix this in your mind And always remember, an assumption, though false, if sustained, will harden into fact. You and your Father are one, and your Father is everything that was, is, and will be. Therefore, that which you seek, you already are. It can never be so far off as to even be near, because nearness implies separation. The great Pascal said, "You never would have sought me had you not already found me." What you now desire, you already have, and you seek it only because you have already found it. You found it in the form of desire. It is just as real in the form of desire as it is going to be to your bodily organs, your sensory perception. It is just as real as a desire as it is real when you perceive it with your senses. And acknowledging this truth, that is what makes you people of the way. You are already that which you seek, and you have no one to change but self in order to express it. Earlier this week, I was working on a new Neville narration for my YouTube channel. And in this Neville narration, he talks about the secret of prayer. And it very much aligns with what is taught, obviously, in his masterclass. But he gives some distinctions that I found to be very eye-opening. This is actually this particular lecture I had not read before. So I read it for the first time and immediately I was like, oh, this, I have to narrate this. This is so powerful. It aligns with everything that we're teaching here in Sunday Mystery School. It ties into what we talk about on our Tuesday night live streams, Neville and Chill. Just really like it's so powerful, so potent, and so revealing. And so I'm going to share one of the key ideas here because I found it to be just kind of opened a new level of relating to this idea of prayer. So particularly the idea I want to share is he was talking about how there's this symbolism when people pray, they face a certain direction. Okay, so facing Jerusalem or facing east or facing Mecca or facing, a holy city in this world. And human beings, we tend to take things very literally. So a lot of times you'll see people literally finding, the cardinal direction that they need to face, and then going through the act of prayer, facing that direction. And what Neville was saying is that that's a physical correlation to a higher dimensional idea, a higher dimensional concept. And the higher dimensional concept is that you are orienting yourself into the consciousness of being what you're praying for. Okay, so you're orienting yourself. So you turn and you face Jerusalem, which is the city of fulfillment. Okay, so it's like in the story, it's like, oh, and so the prophet turned and faced east and then began to pray. But what the message is that's encoded in that, portrayal of the scene, the symbolism of the scene that's given to us in this story, is that when we pray, we orient our consciousness to face in the correct direction, meaning we orient our consciousness to be in alignment with that which we desire. So we don't pray, this is the key idea here, we don't pray from the feeling of not having. We pray from the feeling of having. And of course, that's what Mark 11:24 is telling us. When you pray, believe that you have received, and you will. It's like, but how do we believe that we have received? Well, we orient our consciousness to the city of peace, which is the city of satisfaction, because a desire disturbs, right? A desire disturbs the pool of water, right? The pool of Bethesda. It's like the desire is what disturbs us because suddenly we feel like there's something that we would like that we don't immediately see. And so to enter into the city of peace is to satiate that desire. And so we begin to orient our consciousness when we make an intentional effort, sitting down, laying down to go into prayer, we orient ourselves into that consciousness. Over the years of my life, I have seen people pray. Okay, I'm sure we all have. We've seen people pray. And I've noticed that certain people have a different habit of praying than other people. I've noticed the people that pray about what they don't want. Please make it so that X, Y, and Z doesn't happen. I've heard people pray that way. Dear God, please make it so that X, Y, and Z doesn't happen. Please make it so that, this worst case scenario doesn't manifest. And this, other thing that we just really don't feel like experiencing, make sure that doesn't happen. Okay. So that's one way of praying. But that would not be facing Jerusalem. Can we agree? That would not be facing and orienting our consciousness in alignment of what we do want. So what would the other example be of praying? The other example when praying would be to say, thank you that. Dear God, which is a higher dimensional version of myself, that like the one being that encompasses all being. Let me speak to that part of my own being. And let me give thanks that which I desire is already a fact. Thank you that this person is now healed. Thank you that my finances are now healed and flowing. Thank you that I have this promotion at work. Thank you that my child is succeeding at school. Thank you that for my new house, right? Thank you for this. Thank you for that. Okay. So I'm recognizing that it's already here and I'm giving thanks for it. And that is facing Jerusalem. That is aligning our consciousness in the direction of the feeling of the wish fulfilled and then going into the prayer. There's a lot of ways to pray. And the reason why this is spoken of so much in Neville's work and also portrayed in so many different, like this state of prayer is like, it's characterized over and over again, but like in slightly different dramas throughout the scriptures. It's the act of praying is symbolized over and over again. Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the back of an unbridled donkey, okay, with people laying down the palm leaves. Okay, so that's a dramatization of the state of prayer. We've got the prophets facing Jerusalem. We've got, conquering the city of Jericho, sending in the spy to figure out what the feeling would be, that fragrant odor that is Jericho, right? And then in jubilation, the walls come down and the city is taken. Okay, so it's like all of these stories, the whole Bible really is a drama of how to operate this model of reality. Hey, your consciousness. And by changing your consciousness, you can literally experience anything you want to experience. And this is what sets you free. That's the Bible in a sentence. Okay, that's this communication of the sacred wisdom. That's why the ancients found it so important to pass down this knowledge, is to give us this freedom, to give us this operator's manual for consciousness, to set us free so that in the dark world of the senses, we're able to find a book that isn't, materialized in the dark world of the senses that we can read. And as we read it, the words come alive and it begins to lift our level of awareness to this higher plane. We learn about things like the Christ mind. We learn about things about, the fourth dimension. Maybe the Bible doesn't say the fourth dimension in those words, but we begin to tune into this higher level of awareness, this higher level of reality. We begin to hear, that we are sons of the Most High and that, this inheritance is promised to us, the inheritance of the whole earth, and that wherever we walk, wherever the sole of our foot shall tread, that has been given to us. And all of this is a communication, a transmission, a remembering, a cue to remember our true nature and to step in and begin to embody our fullness in that state of inheriting the kingdom of heaven, our fullness as sons of the Most High. That's what this whole exploration is about. And to the world, this seems like a mystery. And that's why we just boldly claim the title Mystery School, because there really is no method of going out into the world to find this truth. It's really about going in, and any truth that we find on the outside if it is rooted in true truth, is only going to tell us to go within. And that's why at the end of every Sunday Mystery School session, we end with practice. Don't be hearers of the word only, be doers of the word. The only way you're going to know that anything that is said in this space is true is to go within and find for yourself the truth. Is to go within and practice this state of turning down the volume of this 3D world and accessing a higher plane of awareness, and then see what you see. Choose a scene, live the scene, allow it to dominate your mind, and then come back here and you have now tested it. Let's see what happens in this world of form and flesh. The channel Mastermind, I have a whole group of students who are very avidly applying this wisdom in their daily lives. And before we go live on the live streams for YouTube, I invite these students to all come together. We're all students. We're all studying this sacred mystic wisdom, to come together and to share, how we're applying this in our daily lives. And the stories are so inspiring because, it's like whatever I conceptualize locally and personally about how to use this, being able to see other people also putting it into practice. It's kind of like, you're in a studio, an art studio, and everybody's painting. And you're so focused on your own painting, but then you get up to go get some coffee and you're walking through the room and you happen to look at other people's canvases and it inspires you. How could it not? Oh, this person is doing this style of painting, or they're using, this type of paint, or they're using this type of brush, or they're, painting words and I was only painting, shapes and colors, right? So it's like you get this whole expanded perspective of what is truly possible as artists, creating on the canvas that is the mind of God. And so I get to benefit from, hearing the sharing of these other people. All of us benefit from hearing each other's sharing and hearing the success stories, hearing the, hey, I heard one from Orlena this morning. I had this desire to beautify my neighborhood. So I started going into my imagination and imagining what the feeling would be like, where my whole neighborhood, all the community coming together and creating a greater experience of community, beautifying the local playground, changing the way the trees are planted along the highway, having events, having community events for the kids, celebrating the heroes of the community, the police and the firefighters. What would the feeling be like? And literally creating these scenes in imagination and then giving birth to them. And I got to see pictures this morning from one of these events that was imagined in detail before it ever came into form and flesh. It's a very powerful way to inspire imagination, to join in with other people and share in these very high moods of application of this wisdom. And so that's an open invitation. If that type of idea appeals to you, I encourage you to join the mastermind, to have those experiences, and then also to do the group imaginal meditations. We're holding one here in just a minute at the conclusion of Sunday Mystery School. We're going to go into the silence together and do an ascent on the topic of money. We're going to catch a new mood on the topic of money, on what it means to really embody our power as creators in relationship to this idea of currency. So at this time, I'm going to invite anyone who is currently in the Zoom room who would like to share or contribute or comment on this conversation to do so. And if you're not in the Zoom room and you are a Channel Mastermind member, go ahead and join the Zoom room because we're going to go into the mastermind session after this. Orlena, go ahead.
Excellent. Oh my goodness. So my question is to you, because I'm always trying to be more disciplined, besides practice, of course, what are ways to reach, more discipline? Like, what do you do?
To be disciplined about my imaginal acts?
Exactly.
Yes. Okay, so you said besides practice. Okay, so it really does come down to practice, but it's about some of it is about the state of orientation towards the idea of practicing.
Okay.
So there's a spirit of I find that I'm best at discipline when it comes from a place of curiosity.
Okay.
Avid curiosity. Something happens. Okay, how can I use my imagination to reshape this? or to remold this. Rather than just kind of passively accepting things,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like a lazy way of living, especially when you know this truth.
Mm-hmm.
Tapping into that spirit of curiosity and saying, okay, well, how would I reshape that? What could I do in my imagination to beautify this or to make it more lovely?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, I think we all are, if you're on Sunday Mystery School and you're listening to this live stream or you're part of the mastermind connected to this wisdom, you're definitely doing this for your life, right? For your own personal experience. But you can also do it like just for things in passing, like um, being, I was at the grocery store, in the checkout line and overhearing a conversation. I don't know these people, but what I
Yeah.
heard wasn't lovely. So I was like, I'm just going to completely, as I walked out carrying my bags, I completely reimagined the conversation. And then I smiled to myself at how awesome it is to be standing in the checkout line and hearing people having such a lovely conversation.
Right.
Right. And so it was my curiosity. It wasn't condemnation of the conversation. It was just, oh, that could be more lovely. Let me just go ahead and change it right now. Like what, just curiosity. How would I go about rewriting what I just heard? What
Right.
would I prefer to hear? Right.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
like there's this spirit of curiosity, the spirit of like, what are some new and exciting ways to apply this knowledge, and then over time, by making that a consistent way of being, I think we become faster at catching things that otherwise would just flow right through unchallenged.
Right.
Right? We begin to
Right.
challenge our assumptions and say, is that really the world I want to live in?
Mm-hmm.
I think of something lovelier.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for that question, Orlana, and contribution.
Welcome.
Okay, the Zoom room filled up. Awesome. Okay. Anybody else have anything to contribute? I see Rose is unmuted. Rose, if you wanted to say something, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Josiah. Thank you for everything.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Thank you for being with us. Did you have a
Yeah,
comment
this is
or
wonderful.
yeah,
Oh, no, I didn't. I was just
okay,
joining for the
for the
session with
mastermind? Okay, yeah,
Goddard.
perfect. Awesome.
Yep.
Okay,
Okay.
beautiful. All right. So final thoughts here. So this is the conclusion of lesson 4. No one to change but self. And we invested several sessions of Sunday Mystery School really going into this. And it's because it really is the pinnacle of mystery school teachings. In the past, this level of radical personal responsibility for one's life was so off-putting to the majority of people who had really given their power away to ideas of the external, that it was hidden and really brought into, kind of private or sacred places, for initiates to be taught. And thankfully, we have graduated in civilization and era of mankind to where we can now speak of these ideas openly. And it's because the time has come for broad humanity to begin to take responsibility for what we are imagining collectively as a civilization and begin to lift our concept of what it can mean to be a human living on planet Earth. And so, kind of looking at the trajectory of Sunday Mystery School here, we've really broken it down. We've gone through, really developing this fundamental understanding of consciousness as the only reality. And then we've moved into learning what fourth dimensional thinking is. And then once we've really built that bridge, now we've developed and cultivated a deep understanding of what it means to change oneself. And then the final idea here is to persist in that assumption, to remain faithful to the ideal. And we'll pick up with that idea heading into our next session of Sunday Mystery School next week. Until then, my friends, everybody on YouTube, imagine wisely and practice. Practice in the small moments, practice in the stillness, practice in everything. And until next time, imagine wisely, and I will see you all next week.